Hey guys, so in today's video we're going to be going over constructors in Java. Now in the previous video we talked about instance fields, the scope of a variable, and the final keyword in Java. So we've gotten pretty far. We know how to write a class, we know how to make our object do things, we know how to store information about objects, and we know how to create them. Now let's look at this line again. When we're creating an object or an instance of the dog class, notice how there's parentheses after the dog. Typically, when you have a word or a phrase followed by parentheses, that means that you're calling a method. So if you're starting to think that when we're creating an instance of a class, we're calling a method, then that's actually correct. In Java, there's a special type of method called a constructor. And basically, constructors are called when you create the object. They're the method that sets off the whole creation of object in memory. But if you look at my dog class, you'll notice how I haven't really specified or written anything special. You don't see any constructor here. That's because that if you don't explicitly write a constructor yourself, Java will provide you with a default constructor. And a default constructor is basically, it takes no parameters or no arguments. It's just the most default form of a constructor. So it'll look something like this. So let's talk about this constructor right here. The first important thing to note is how there's no return type. When you're writing a regular method, you have to specify the return type, even if it's nothing, in which case you would write void. The second thing is the name of your constructor is very unique. It has to match up exactly with the class name. Like here, if I put a lowercase d, this is not a constructor anymore. It's a normal method, and it's actually going to yell at you because you didn't put a return type. But as soon as you put a name of the method that matches exactly with the class, this is not a regular method anymore, it's a constructor. And that also follows that if you're writing your normal method, make sure that you're not having the method name the exact same as the class, because then that's not a method, that's a constructor. So since I didn't explicitly write this, Java basically supplied me with this, except you just couldn't see it. So now we know that when we're creating a dog object, what's being called is the dog constructor. And we can put something in here like so that we can actually see that in fact this method is the one that's being called. So when I run this, it prints out in constructor twice, because we created two dog objects. Awesome, so this is how a basic constructor syntax looks like. Now remember how we have this instance fields, right? So there's a breed, age, and gender, and they're private because you want to make sure your data is secure. So you could have setters and getters for all of them. That can be a little inconvenient, right? Because we know that every dog is going to have some basic breed, age, and gender. So if we had to, right now with the current layout we had, we'd have to call 3 separate methods to assign values to our breed, age, and gender instance fields. But a really common and conventional way of assigning values to your instance fields is in the constructor. So that's basically really convenient because then you can just create the object, pass in whatever data as parameters into the constructor, and bam, all of your values are assigned, and it's really fast and convenient. So the way we do this is we just put parameters, just like any old method, in between the parentheses when we're writing our constructors. So here I might have string the breed, string the gender, maybe int the age. So here, now I can assign the values that are passed in to my instance fields. So I can say breed equals the breed, and gender equals the gender, and age equals the age. Now you're probably thinking, it's kind of weird that I have to, give these variables different names, the age, the breed, the gender. And you're right, you could actually just make them good old breed, gender, and age. So if we change this to breed, and age, then we could do that. But there is a problem with this. So when we have, remember how we talked about the scope of a variable, right? Instance fields, their scope is the entire class, but local variables and parameters, their scope is only within the method. And local variables and parameters take precedence. So in this case, all we're doing is taking this value and assigning it to itself. So this basically has no effect, and that's what it's telling you. That's why it's underlined in yellow. It's saying the assignment to variable gender has no effect. That's because we're referring to the same variables. So how do we tell Java that the breed we're talking about is the instance field? Well, for that, we can use the this keyword. Notice how immediately they changed color, right? They became blue because now they match with the instance field. So this refers to the class. So it's like this is saying yourself. I'm saying I want my breed to equal whatever breed they're passing in. So you can use this for even calling methods, like let's say when I want to bark, I want to do something with their human dog ears. So I could call this human to dog ears. And that would make sure that I'm calling the method that I've written here and not maybe some other human to dog ears that might exist. So just like final and private and public, this is a keyword. So remember that your variable or method names can't have the name this. But this is a super convenient way of making sure that you're assigning the correct instance field to the parameter that's being passed in. Awesome. So we've got our constructor, and you'll notice that we're getting errors here because now there's no such constructor with no parameters. I have to pass in parameters. Keep in mind that the default constructor is only supplied if you haven't explicitly written a constructor, but in this case we have. So I have to pass in arguments. But let's say that at my rescue shelter, I know there's a dog coming, but I don't exactly know information about it yet. Like I got a call and they're saying they're gonna bring in a dog, but we don't know any information about it. Well, when we get the call, we want to at least create a dog object so that we can account for it, right? But right now we can't because there's no constructor without passing in parameters. So maybe I could do none, none, and 0. I could put in default values like this and it would stop yelling at me. But this can be a little bit like not clear because you might forget to change it or whatever the reason may be, this could be inconvenient. That's where we talk about the very important concept of method overloading. Overloading refers to when you have defined multiple methods with the same name, but what's different about them are the parameters. So in this case, method overloading also works with constructors. So I could just have a normal constructor like this. And when I have that, the error goes away because now the constructor exists. So depending on what parameters you pass in, Java will know which method you're trying to call. And then you can do different things depending on what parameters are passed in. Like let's say you have dogs that bark differently, right? Smaller dogs might have a more high-pitched bark versus bigger dogs might have a more lower-pitched bark. So depending on that, you might want to print something else. But you don't want to make your user pass in what kind of size dog they have. You want to give them some kind of default bark method that'll just print out your good old woof. But you want to give the option to print out something else depending on how big your dog is. So then we can say like public void bark, and we can have a Boolean variable, is big. And we can say, okay, if my dog is big, then I want to print out, I don't know, deep woof. Otherwise, I want to print out a high-pitched woof. So now this gives my user the option to pass in how big their dog is. But also if they don't want to, then you could just call in the good old bark. But if you want, you could pass in a Boolean value saying whether or not your dog is big, and accordingly it'll print out something else. So here, maybe with my dog 2, maybe I have a really big golden retriever. So I could say dog2.bark and true, because my dog is big. So now we'll see that when we run this, Here we called the normal bark, so it just printed woof. But here we called the second bark method that takes a Boolean parameter, and it printed out deep woof. So method overloading is a really fundamental and also convenient feature of Java, where your methods can have the same name as long as they have different parameters, and Java won't get confused. Like if I did public void bark, it'll give me an error because now Java doesn't know which method to refer to. But if you give it different parameters, then it'll be okay. Awesome, so we just learned about constructors in Java, the default constructor, overloading methods, and the this keyword in Java. I'll see you guys in the next video.